I'm going to ask that if there's any conflicts of interest to declare. I'm not aware of any, but if anybody has any conflicts of interest to declare on the board, please do so now and we can deal with those. Okay, seeing none then. I'm going to immediately ask our CFO, Sean Walker, to help us through the draft financial statements and to introduce the auditors so that we can hear from them as to how the audit went. Over to you, Sean, please.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. I'm going to share my screen or attempt to share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I will mention that we have Chris Treneman and Alex Harris with us on the call today from Grant Thornton.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today.
So their team did all the heavy lifting, or is in the middle, or I guess finishing up doing the heavy lifting for the audit that we've undergone for the first CPATA's operations. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation. Can everybody see it on screen?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So I'll walk through the PowerPoint. A number of the statements are actually in the PowerPoint. So my intention was to not have to flip between the PowerPoint and the actual draft audited statements, but I can. But if something pops up in particular that we want to look at, I can for sure. And especially when we get down to the notes, I've just got a general note slide, but we can definitely go into more detail as needed. Okay. So just a quick welcome slide here. So as Tom mentioned a few minutes ago, the purpose of this meeting is to review the draft audited statements prepared for 2021 and the opening year of 2020. This session is being offered in both French and English with simultaneous translation. And for anybody that doesn't know, at the bottom of the screen, there's a little globe button. And if you click on that, you can choose between English and French translation. And I'll try to speak slowly so it allows our translating folks to keep up and I don't confuse myself. Okay. And if there's any questions, by all means, stop me at any time and we can address them at the time. Okay. So the status of the audit. So the Grant Thornton team has substantially completed the audit of the financial statements. There's a few things that always need to be completed right at the end, usually around this time when we meet with the board. So one of those is the management rep letter that Daryl and I will sign off on right after this meeting. Approval of the financial statements, the legal inquiry responses. So Chris and Alex had sent some letters out to some of the law firms and lawyers that we work with, just to touch base with them to see if there's anything outstanding that could either impact the 2021 year, or if there's anything substantial that would carry forward into 2022 that might need to be disclosed. So they sent those out and asked for a response. Subsequent event procedures, similar to the legal letters. I'll meet with Chris and Alex and go through anything that's happened since the end of the year, see if there was anything significant that has transpired. And then just filing of the tax returns for 2021. And it's a charity or it's a not-profit return, so it's not a true like T2 corporate income tax return. So we'll get that prepared. And then the one big highlight for me is the audit opinion so far right now is that the financial statements present fairly the financial position of CPATA. So for accountants like me, that translates into a clean audit opinion, which is what we're always striving for. Okay. So we're going to take a quick look at some of the actual statements that are within the audited financial statements. The first is the statements of financial position, very similar to a balance sheet for for-profit companies. Not a whole lot of different categories to look at, but you will see the big areas are cash and cash equivalents of $466,000. Our liabilities at the end of 2021 were $255,000. So for a net cash balance of just over $200,000 at the end of the year, if we were to pay off all those payables, and an unrestricted net asset balance, which is, to try to explain simply, is it's the cumulative impact of all of the revenues less expenses over the past few years. So it's kind of like if everything was liquidated, this would be the balance that would be left over. I'm going to try to make that a little bit bigger too, so it's a little easier to read. Okay. So the statement of operations, or really the income statement, you see we had just over $2 million of revenue in 2021. Nothing in 2020, of course, because we began official operations and came into force there at the end of June in 2021. And the two bigger items of revenue were, of course, our license fees that we collected from the agents in 2021. And also CPO provided a grant for the prorated portion of fees for the remainder of the year once we came into force there in June. Okay. Now the expenses totaled just over 1.4 million, and we had an excess of revenue over expenses of 633,000, and there was a handful of larger expense items that I've got some notes on here. So the board and committee expenses, these relate to honorariums that we pay to board members and to committee members for the time that they so gracefully dedicate to CPATA. Legal fees of just over 250,000. In 2021, we did a privacy impact analysis, so that's included in the legal fees. We've also spent time with our legal counterpart, legal supporters to put some programs in place around complaints and also registration, and some of the support that they've given us as far as like looking at the bank loan and some of the other agreements that we would have entered into. Professional and consulting fees, just under 393,000. So this relates to the HR recruiting fees when we hired staff early on. Some of the financial support. So this is where your outsourced financial services group costs are recorded. Planning support. Remember Don Thompson provided some, or continues to provide some assistance as we get up and running and do some planning. That's in there. And then salaries and benefits. So we hired the first staff members in June of 2021, and these costs represent the staff that have come on board. Okay. There we go. So the statement of changes in net assets, this is really a summary of how we went from in 2020 having a loss of 388,000, adding in the $633,000 surplus that we had in 2022 to give us again that net asset balance of 245,000. Okay. So this ultimately the goal is to keep this net asset number in a positive position. We don't want it to get too positive because as a not-for-profit, we're not supposed to be generating large profits each year, but we need to make sure that we have enough in reserve to support the future operations. So that was, remember, part of the budgeting plan that we did this year was to continue to increase that just slightly to have some quote unquote rainy day funds in case our fees are either delayed or the ones we bring in aren't as significant as we had planned for. Okay. Next is the statement of cash flows. So this really shows how cash is used on an aggregate balance throughout the year. So you'll notice we started the year with $0 of cash. In January, we signed the agreement with Royal Bank to take on a loan that would support the operations of CPATA until we started collecting fees. So for the first 6 months of the year, we drew into that line of credit and we got up to just under 900,000 before fees started coming in late June, early July. We paid off all of the original amounts that we had listed as accounts payable, bought a little bit of some computer equipment, and then at the end of the year, we had a positive balance of cash of 466,000. That again agrees up to that statement of financial position. Okay. At the end of the financial statements, there are the notes to the financial statements. So I've just got the titles here, but we can look at them individually too if there's questions on each one. So really the nature of the operations, this is exactly that. It's the history and the purpose of CPATA and what we're here for. Number two is the not-for-profit organizational standards. And since this was the first year of doing the financial statements, we had to adopt some standards, and that's why you've seen on that on the statement of financial position, you see that opening balance column for January 1st, 2020. So that all relates to the first year. Significant accounting policies. So these are specific policies that we follow for individual areas of accounting and the different policies and rules that we follow. The capital assets, so again, the computer hardware that we've bought to date and the amount that's been written off or amortized so far. And then there's a note in there about the credit facilities and the $1 million loan/line of credit that we have access to. And then there's another note there to say the amount that we withdrew. Another note on the payables and accruals. So this is really highlights just the categories of the different amounts that we owe at the end of 2021. And the contingent liability. So this relates to, like I mentioned a little bit ago, around the legal letters. And if there was anything that was either outstanding at the end of 2021 or that could potentially be seen as a liability in the future, we would, if it was significant enough and it was determinable, if the amount was determinable, we could record those as a contingent future liability. But at this time, there was none needed for the statements. Okay. So that is a very brief run through of each of the statements that makes up the audited financial statements. Are there any questions or any areas of the actual statements themselves that we wanted to take a look at? Anyone? Okay. We all good? Okay. All right. So we also
they're fairly straightforward financial statements as far as I can tell from my experience looking at these things.
Yep, and we especially where we're just getting underway, there's not a lot of historical items that needed to be cleaned up or looked into. So relatively straightforward in the first couple of years. Okay. So if there are no questions, I think we then I believe we look to approve them, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. So if no one has any questions on the financial statements at all, Ruth is our finance person, so I'm going to let Ruth see if these financial statements pass muster.
Yes, I'm absolutely happy to make that motion, Mr. Chair. I've had lots of really good discussion with Daryl and Sean throughout this whole time and process, and I feel like Sean's doing a great job. Daryl and Sean have a good partnership. I think that the organization understands its risks and does everything in its power to mitigate them. As you said, these are really straightforward financial statements. I'm quite happy to make a motion to approve them.
Okay. I did notice one. I'm a wordsmith as opposed to a numbersmith, so I did notice that at page 10 of your draft statement, under note 3, second paragraph, first line, there's 2 currentlies. I think you should delete one of the currentlies. Pick whichever one you want, but I don't think you need 2 of them. Just that's my only comment.
I'm still going to make the motion.
Yes, please do. Subject to that. Subject to that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to change. I don't think it'll change the substance of the financial statement. So
yeah.
you can let that go.
So Tom, for the record, the motion is in the agenda.
Yes,
and
it
it's
is.
fine.
And
I think what Ruth is moving is that be it resolved, the board approves CPATA's audited financial statements for the period ending December 31, 2021, as provided in this meeting package. And further be it resolved that the chair of the board and the chief executive officer are authorized to sign the statements on behalf of the college, and the CEO is authorized to publish the statements on CPATA's website and distribute them as required.
thank you, Daryl. So
I'm prepared to second that
Seconder?
one, Tom.
Doug is seconding the motion. Okay, all in favor? All right, passed, carried. Okay, so now I want to thank the auditors for attending, Alexandra and Chris and Sean. I think we're going to go into an in-camera session now, and then we will
With the auditors.
with the auditors, and then we're going to come back. I'm not sure how we're going to do that yet.
No, we don't come back. So this will finish the public meeting
Okay.
and we'll go in camera. The board will have a discussion. Sean and I will stay for the beginning of the meeting, and then the board will have a time with the auditors themselves.
Okay, great. So this concludes the public portion then of the meeting.
So I'll stop the recording for the public meeting.
Thank you.
And I'll thank the staff for their participation.